Hi everyone, my name is Stephen Hick, and a comment was left, and someone asked if I would do a talk on free will. So this is what I'm going to do. In this talk, I'm going to provide an overview of the notion of freedom or free will. I'll review the kinds of freedom that we experience as we move through the stages of enlightenment. And the idea that we have free will stems from the mistaken belief that we are separate individuals. Stay till the end, and I'm going to tell you a bit about how we can navigate this whole field. Once we see that we in fact are not independent actors, but rather totally interconnected as a unified whole, free will no longer makes sense. One obvious indicator of this can be seen by anyone, that we actually have no control over what thoughts arise or don't arise. You can really see this in any moment. Our wills are not truly free in the sense that there's no fixed, separate, independent self that is making decisions. Instead, our decisions arise from a complex web of causes and conditions that are constantly changing and interacting with each other. While we may feel that we have free will, it's ultimately an illusion based on our attachment to the idea, the belief that we're a fixed, separate self. To truly possess free will, one would need to have a comprehensive understanding of all the factors that influence thoughts and behaviors. Additionally, we would need to have complete mastery over these factors, allowing them to have complete control over our decisions and actions. Can you see that you cannot decide your next mental state, your next thought, the next decision, whatever action, until it actually arises? Although free will does not exist, it is still possible to kind of establish parameters in your life that increase the likelihood of certain outcomes. For instance, if you remove all the candy from your home, you reduce the chances of indulging in sweets. However, the desire to eat sweets is not something you can control, since your desire simply exists without any influence. Your influence. This can also be applied to the spiritual path of awakening. Although we do not control the arising of desire to awaken, we can cultivate factors such as mindfulness to become more aware of thoughts, feelings, habits, and so forth. And we can engage in practices such as meditation and contemplation to cultivate greater clarity and insight into the nature of reality. When we are aware, we can also make conscious choices and take actions that are aligned with our deepest values and aspirations, even if we recognize that these choices and actions are ultimately not ours. They're just conditioned by a multitude of factors. The notion, our engagement with free will kind of goes through some stages. When we're in the state of egoic unconsciousness, where we see ourselves as a limited and conditioned self. We're completely identified with our patterns and conditioning. And as a result, we have no freedom to act outside these patterns. We just kind of on autopilot. Our actions are determined by our conditioning. In this state, there's no possibility of freedom because we're acting solely from the conditioned mind. The concept of choice implies a level of awareness that's just not present in the state of egoic unconsciousness. When an individual no longer identifies themselves as a separate individual, they experience a sense of liberation. By identifying with perhaps the witness or identifying with awareness, a person can detach themselves from their conditioning and experience a greater sense of freedom. By recognizing a thought that is conditioned, they're no longer obligated to act on it, right? Because they have this heightened sense of awareness. They can choose not to react automatically from their conditioning. Instead, opt to pause, reflect, and respond with greater clarity. And this sense of freedom is available to those who no longer fully identify with their egoic self and have this greater sense of awareness and consciousness. The experience of freedom is related to the level of awareness that a person has. In the state of unconsciousness, where one is identified with a separate self and the conditioned mind, there's no freedom because we're bound to act according to our conditioning. However, when we no longer identify with the separate self, there is a sense of freedom because it seems, apparently, that one can choose to step out of their conditioning. And this is possible because there's an awareness of the conditioning and one can recognize a conditioned thought arising and not act upon it. Now, I want to go much deeper here. When we go even deeper, we realize that we're not a separate self nor a witnessing self, but an expression of infinite consciousness. When we recognize our true nature as pure consciousness, the question of free will becomes absolutely irrelevant. At this level, it is consciousness that is choosing, and there's no real freedom of choice for the individual because there's no individual to begin with. Rather, the individual is like a wave in the ocean, an expression of infinite consciousness that ultimately governs everything. Therefore, true freedom is not the freedom to choose, but the realization that there's no chooser, only the expression of infinite consciousness. Now, whenever I bring up this topic, it raises questions around responsibility and punishment for deeds. The notion of responsibility and punishment can seem puzzling considering the non-existence of free will. So if a person commits a crime due to their unconscious conditioning, are they truly responsible for their actions? And if we conclude that they're not responsible, then what is the purpose of a justice system or penalties? It is true that a completely unconscious person cannot be held responsible for their actions. However, it is important to recognize that human beings are meant to move out of this unconscious state. If an individual remains stuck in this state, they're going to continue to create suffering for themselves and for others, and will have to suffer the consequences of their actions. And this suffering may lead to their eventual awakening. Karma, or the law of cause and effect, operates in such situations. As well, punishment may be necessary just to ensure the safety and protection of others in society. But it should also be seen as an opportunity for the perpetrator to awaken and transform their consciousness. It's not about revenge or retribution, but rather about creating conditions that may actually facilitate their awakening. Although it's common to become entangled with the body-mind, we always have the choice to step out of this entanglement and question our true nature. When we consent to limit ourselves in time and space and identify as a temporary, finite, separate entity, we are destined to experience pleasure and pain consistent with that identity. However, the experience of suffering can be a wake-up call. It is for many of us, telling us that we have mistaken ourselves and need to investigate our true nature. By turning around and stepping out of this entanglement, we can discover the first and last freedom, the freedom to choose our true nature as pure awareness. When we choose to be a separate self, we willingly accept the limitations of our body-mind. This surrender of our true freedom leads us to experience the pleasure and pain in the world. This freedom is constantly accessible to us in any moment. We can exercise it at any time. It's not a choice we make in the past and have been suffering the consequences of it since then. Instead, it's a choice we make moment by moment. Therefore, we can choose not to make that choice at any time. If someone were to ask me about their role or purpose in life, which often comes up when we talk about free will, it would be tempting to just dismiss this question by saying that the individual self is non-existent and therefore you have no purpose. However, I really think that this is an unskillful teaching because it ignores the fact that there may be meaning and purpose to an individual life. While some teachers may be reluctant to make concessions in their teaching, it's important to tailor our understanding to each individual in question that arises. This will involve differing degrees of concession depending on the specific circumstances. Even though we might not be able to speak absolute truth in response to every question, we can still speak with compassion and do our best to convey our understanding in a helpful way. The objection to the idea of not having freedom to choose is that it can lead to a belief that one can suddenly decide to, you might as well go rob a bank, right, or just harm people. However, this line of thinking overlooks the fact that the mental map of human beings is not intrinsically designed for such actions. This argument may lead to non-judgment of different mental patterns, but it does not imply that we should not respond appropriately to harmful behavior. Even though we may not judge the individual self responsible for the behavior, we must still respond appropriately. It's not always suitable to respond with a non-dual understanding and say that everything is made of awareness and therefore it's okay to behave in any way. Sometimes it's essential to respond with a clear no and say that that behavior is not acceptable. The horrors that happen in the world, whether they are extreme or less severe expressions of ignorance, are inevitable. However, sometimes these horrors can bring some light and help us see the opposite. So this doesn't mean that Buddhism denies the existence of choice or personal responsibility. Rather, it emphasizes the importance of creating mindfulness and cultivating wisdom in order to understand the true nature of reality and make skillful choices that lead to positive outcomes in the world. In other words, although we may not have free will, we can still make choices that lead to our well-being and to the well-being of others and to awakening. So I hope you found this helpful. I know it's a complicated topic and we can often get bogged down in the concepts of it all. But I hope I was clear enough in communicating the kind of the nuanced character of this great debate around free will. Anyway, thanks for your attention and hope to see you soon. Hit the like button if you like this video and please leave any comments or questions that you might have. See you soon.